Today we begin with a bit of a mystery. Why, more than a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, are some products still hard or impossible to find at the grocery store, even those seemingly unrelated to pandemic necessities? Lisa Fletcher looked into the question and found it has a lot to do with America's surprisingly fragile supply chain.
Christine Gutleben-Becker is a businesswoman and mom of 3 in Washington, D.C.'s northern suburbs. After making the weekly run to the grocery store, she's become used to the new reality for consumers everywhere.
In some ways, shopping feels like an experiment. What are we going to get? What can we make with what we're going to get? And it feels par for the course, I think, in these times, almost normal.
The new normal means missing items, sometimes empty shelves.
Have you noticed that your choices have diminished in terms of the same type of product with different brands or multiple types of product within a brand?
Yes, absolutely. So today I couldn't get my favorite tortilla brand, and I actually realized that I haven't been able to get it, I think, for the past year. And so we've learned to just accept other types of tortillas, and it feels like a small price to pay.
Tortillas are just one of the many products that have seen dramatic sales increases thanks to COVID. In the first 6 months of the pandemic, February to August, the products that saw the biggest jump in sales were hand sanitizer, up 838%, soaps up 65%, and disinfectants up 61%. But staple food items also saw big rises as consumers rushed to fill their pantries with staples, canned goods, and baking supplies. Overall grocery spending up 14% since the start of the pandemic.
Did you go through a period of frustration and then sort of acceptance of all of this?
In normal life, we got really used to our very specific products and the things that we loved, and that was really great. But we've learned to adapt, and most of us are not finding the things that we loved. And that feels very appropriate for these times.
But how did the retail structure that usually means we never see an empty shelf or missing product break down so quickly?
I think it started happening long before we ever started to see store shelves being empty.
Professor Brian Gibson is the executive director of the Center for Supply Chain Innovation at Auburn University in Alabama.
So we know those products that everybody grabbed for immediately because that we were just living in this big unknown. But how did that rapid transition from everything to nothing affect the supply chain globally?
You start to see raw material suppliers in foreign countries where the pandemic hit earlier. They're closing down facilities. They're telling everybody to stay at home. So pretty soon your raw materials and your components and all your supplies are slowing down on their flow into the United States. And that ultimately catches up because a lot of companies have gotten very lean over the last 20 years.
For manufacturers, being lean means only storing the parts and components you need right now, relying on 24/7 supply chains to deliver new inventory just at the right time. It saves billions in storage, but it means any glitch in the chain and things stand still. Supply chain disruption is nothing new. If you've ever lived in a place that's experienced a natural disaster like a hurricane, you know what it's like when everybody dashes out to pick up the same supplies. The grocery store, the hardware store, they empty out fast. What made the pandemic different is that the same thing was happening in every city, in every country around the world at the same time. And the supply chain, no matter how well designed, couldn't possibly keep up with the demand.
Walk me through the different chapters of that since the pandemic began.
So I think early on in the pandemic, it was issues of the PPP, the personal protective gear, the masks, the sanitizer, home products, because people didn't know how long they were going to be at home. So, toilet paper, cleaning products, paper towels. There were reports of meat packing plants having problems with COVID and making people nervous. They see it on the news and I got to go out and buy some chicken. I got to go out and buy steak, and I go out and fill up in my freezer.
Producers have responded by trying new tactics to make their limited resources and factory capacity go further.
One thing that the companies have done to try and speed up that process is they've cut back a little bit on the variety. So instead of making 6 different varieties of toilet paper and 12 different packaging sizes, let's focus on 2 brands in our portfolio and go to 4 or 5 packaging options.
But while consumers may be learning to live with less, the pandemic has meant a boom for online retailers and delivery services like UPS, which delivered 6.3 billion packages last year, an increase of 13.7%. And FedEx last summer saw a 31% rise in deliveries, leading the company to predict that by 2023, 100 million parcels will be shipped each day in the U.S., growth that's 3 years ahead of what was predicted before the pandemic. And with the majority of products coming into the country in giant steel shipping containers like this, the pandemic has also meant a boom for America's ports. Here in Baltimore, business has been growing for the last 11 months, with imports and exports moving through the port increasing 10%.
So how's business been at the port?
Business has been really good. We've really picked
William
up.
Doyle is the executive director of the Port of Baltimore.
How much has e-commerce spiked your business here at the port?
Tremendously. Since July, we've had at least 18 unscheduled rotation container ships come through the port. And that's the equivalent of approximately 30,000 containers that we wouldn't have ordinarily had.
At some other ports, there are so many ships coming in, it's taken days or weeks to unload them. And now a new shortage that's impacting global trade, not enough empty containers.
There is a shortage of containers overseas. So we do move empty containers through the Port of Baltimore on the ships back to the loading ports in Asia and Indian subcontinent.
Experts say the massive increase in e-commerce as a result of lockdowns is likely permanent. But what about other changes?
What happens now?
I've read a lot, put it this way, pundits saying, oh, we're going to fundamentally change how we operate supply chains. We're going to bring everything back to the United States, everything near shore. We're going to do this and this and this. And we've talked to companies and they've said, no, we're not going to do a wholesale change of our supply chain, but we're going to be smarter. And we're going to start off with coming up with better contingency planning.
For Christine and countless other parents, the pandemic has changed buying habits with little expectation things will ever be the same.
I think most moms are shifting to online, and I think we're so busy and focused on our kids and schooling that we don't notice that things don't arrive when we order them. So as long as we have some kind of milk and some kind of fresh produce, we just keep moving forward.
And just as we're learning to live with change and disruption at the grocery store, the supply chains that link modern commerce are also learning and adapting, making them stronger in the future.
I was wondering, because I'm running into all kinds of weird products, that answers a lot of questions. Yep. Is there any hope for a solution?
Well, in the short term, there's still going to be shortages of things like masks and first aid items because of high demand. But in the longer term, President Biden has ordered a review of the global supply chain for everything from computer chips to food. And the White House is really encouraging more domestic production, but they haven't exactly laid out the plan for how we're going to do that.
Okay, thanks, Lisa.